Well, I now invite Kurt Cordis to come forward to start us off. Kurt's presentation is titled Using Stuart Hall's Race the Floating Signifier, a case study of aquatic research and transformation. Kurt, thank you.
Thank you for the introduction and little thing of leading into a health talk. This is health adjacent, so I'm hoping to link some stuff up at the end. But I'm going to be moving really, really quick because I got 15 minutes to try and load a whole bunch of information. First thing I will say, though, is we're here to lift each other up, not bring each other down. And I know this is a room of sociologists, so I don't need to worry as much about that. But still, I always say that before I speak because race is one of those things which are a little bit contentious. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion in that light. And off we go. So I was told that this was about beauty and joy. And so I thought I will share my place of beauty and joy and hope. And that is Bequia, an island in the Caribbean, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. That is where my family is from. I'm born and raised Canadian. That is me. And this is a dive that I actually went on. So I am aquatic. That is my home waters. Scuba diving instructor, sailing skipper, works as a marine park manager. And this place has been transformative for me because everything that I've done since then, I learned a lot from this space. And it is transformative learning. So the whole idea, the breadth and depth of transformation, it crosses over into everything I do. So when I came into Aotearoa, fortunately, I ended up in that drowning prevention and aquatic space. Oh no, it's doing it again? Okay, right. So what I'm talking about today is something that I've been dealing with for my entire life. The whole idea of race in aquatics has been kind of seeping under the level the whole time. And I have dealt with this in Aotearoa. What I'm talking about specifically here is something that's happened because of the rise of the floating campaign that's going on. Everybody's caught on to this floating thing, but there's a lot of baggage with that floating thing, especially that some races float better than other races. And what I've been seeing is this bubbling up under the surface of that assumption, not only in community, but also in research. So I dove into it. And that is one of the reasons why I wrote this. So very fortunately, this was published in the International Journal of Aquatic Research and Education, the Diversity in Aquatics issue, just published this past October, worked on it last year. And this was my attempt to kind of get out in front of this and really make the case for why we should remember that race is not a biological construct. And it connects directly with my thesis, the whole idea of my autoethnography, looking at my heritage, my trajectory, what I have done in this space, and bringing that perspective as me in this skin, in this place, and why I see things differently than a lot of people do. And the good fortune of studying like that is I get to look at people who are from my heritage, who I can actually identify with. Stuart Hall, I didn't know much about him beforehand. And then listening to his lectures, it's like listening to an uncle. It's that kind of connection. And what he's talking about resonates very directly with me because I am diaspora. I did grow up in Canada. It's a lot of parallels going on there. And what he's saying in the Race of Floating Signifier, a badge, a token, a sign. Race is more like a language in the way that it's constructed rather than being biological. And he's getting at a really particular point here. And he's drawing from the linguistic concept, I think is Soze. I'm not going to pronounce that correctly, but then there's Lucklow, and there's a whole line of people who have used this floating signifier concept in a whole bunch of different disciplines. He latched onto it and went, wait a second, race. And he defines it by W.B. Du Bois, who is also Caribbean, by the way, Haitian descent. Differences of color, hair, and bone. And now bone is not bone density. Bone is those subtle shapes of the face and the ears and the things which, when you look at somebody, you go, you're in that category and you're in that category. So he grounds it there and he says, hey, this thing, there's a dilemma here. And Henry Louis Gates called it Hall's dilemma. But he says, the fact that a biological, physiological, or genetic definition haven't been shown out the front door, we know that race is not a biological concept. Walks around the veranda, balcony for those who do not know that term, and jumps back in through the window. We want to believe that race is a biological construct because we want to believe our eyes. That different color, that different shape of the nose means that you come from a different genetic line, therefore there must be something different. But that's not true. But it keeps jumping back in. So what I did in this article is I went back in the history. And I'm just bigging up all the historians because I think they really do an incredible amount of work to draw out from the Western European history what has been missing, what has been lost, what has been covered up. Earl Kirby, Dr. Earl Kirby, I've actually spoken to him many times. He's passed away, unfortunately. He's a historian from St. Vincent the Grenadines and anthropologist, so I big him up at the bottom of that. But this guy, Kevin Dawson, amazing amount of research. And basically what he did was went back into the history and looked at West African aquatics. And the conclusion of the West African aquatics through the eyes of the Western Europeans, West Africans were amphibious. Whether it be boat, whether it be in the water, whatever have you. And they exploited that for gain and for finance, very, very clearly. Then I went to the point of looking at Dr. Osman over in Australia and some other work that goes on, which showed the transference of knowledge from indigenous to Western practice. They took the strokes that were being done, put them in the pool, and then called it theirs, AKA freestyle. And now we have a situation where those same descendants of those people who are amphibious think that the water isn't for them. And this is work done by Ed Aotearoa, not a researcher, but he's up in the UK, journalist, did a whole series on this. This exists, and I've lived this as well in going through this situation. So, and if you look at the stats around the world, you'd think that it's actually true because white people drown less. That's the actual fact worldwide. In New Zealand, same thing. New Zealand Europeans versus a global majority. That's everybody else. They're drowning less, even though New Zealand Europeans are still the dominant group in Aotearoa. But then you look at this, the per capita. That red line is Middle Eastern, Latin American, and African dominant. Off the chart. 3% of the population, 12% of the drownings. 8 times more likely than a white person to drown. Yet, there's no cohesive strategy for that group. And why did we separate it from the Asians? I'm not quite sure. So I go into the scientific racism that's been there. And not going to get into the whole thing, but I highlight James Africanus Horton. He named himself Africanus, medical doctor, 1800s, and was pushing back against the Anthropological Society. Wrote a whole book on it saying, where's your sample size? Your theory doesn't work. What are you doing? And this has been going on, this back and forth in that literature. And then I look at the aquatic side, same thing, back and forth, back and forth. One researcher says, hey, this must be social, it's not biological. The other researcher goes, of course, but there can be some influence in it. You look at the however. This back and forth has been going on for a long time, and I kind of play that out in the article. And then I ran across this one, which is awesome. Genetics research is actually showing that in genetics, they haven't pinned down the concept of race and ethnicity enough to be able, it's actually affecting the outcomes of what they're doing. So I said, we need discussion and we need discourse. We need a way to actually pull it to the center of the table and talk about race in a way which grounds it, which anchors it. And that is why, so that's the article, but then I've actually pushed on from there. And this is me playing around with a possible scenario for talking to aquatic communities, the whole idea of the process of anchoring. And for this room, I'd really highlight the wind and the currents. The current is pushing against the boat. You have to actually be thinking about the boat's going to shift. It's going to pull against your anchor. The wind is pushing against the boat. You have to think about the wind. The wind is pushing against your anchor. That is you, your ontology, your epistemology, how you see the world. And basically coming up with some way to sit in a room and actually have a conversation so we can actually anchor these concepts among us. Another thing I'm really worried about is from an aquatic perspective, everybody's focusing on the intervention and the result in this upstream, downstream. And this is terminology from health that is coming into aquatics now. And it's fairly recent. And my immediate reaction was, how far upstream are you actually going? Because we've got colonization and all these things way up there which are affecting everything. And then what about the downstream? The result is not the end of it. What is happening to people's lives? How are they identifying? What is happening to their identity as you teach this? Because water is not just saving lives. Water is about life. Water is about culture. Water is about religion. All of these things wrap up into it, but nobody's actually looking at that part of it. Everybody's looking at, oh, the drowning toll is down. So anybody familiar with the Othering and Belonging Institute in the United States? So they've done, they continue to do a whole bunch of work on othering and belonging. And I won't get into it now, but I do have references at the end of this with the QR code. But the circle of human concern, coined by John A. Powell et al. And basically he looked at the COVID situation and was looking at the situation in the States where some people were inside the circle of concern and some people were outside the circle of concern. And this whole framework works in a way which you're really questioning, going, when you look at somebody, are they inside your circle of concern or outside your circle of concern? And this is from a conversation that I had with Ed Akera, who made that series in the UK. And we actually came upon this. We're trying to empower our people. They're trying to save us. There's a distinct difference in how things are looked at between the people who are in the industry, the people who are in policy, and the people who are actually on the ground. Who are those people? I'm an other. I see it differently. So I'm going to play this for you. This is probably the most important part of it. Hopefully it works.
That's what aloha really means, right? It comes from here. It's in your na'au, your piko, your heart, whatever you want to say. But it's sharing your spirit, because we all have a spirit, right? And that spirit is what you share with that person, and you give that freely of yourself. Right? And that's how I was taught. That's how it was taught from the beach, at the house, wherever you were at. If you don't have aloha, then you're not alive.
This is what I've learned from the sea. This is what I believe. And as I look back in this research, I start to understand that this plays a pivotal role, not just in your own ontology and how you think, but in policy and in research. How do we put this at the center again? This clip was from a movie about Duke Kahanamoku, who was one of the greats, and again, taught a whole bunch of people to swim. But I went over to Australia and actually challenged at their symposium, when are we going to put aloha, aroha, ubuntu in the center of our frameworks so that we really see people and understand this trajectory that we're looking at is much longer than we think it is? And that is me. Thank you.